it's funny. When they didn't know who I was exactly, obviously. When they found out who I was, they found out because when the shot where I was walking down the street, we had a father and daughter who had this shocked look in their face. So we shot them, and afterwards he's like, "Who's this for?" I said, "Oh, it's for Glenn Beck." He freaked out. "No, you can't use that. God, no, God darn it." He runs off and tells everybody I'm from Glenn Beck. They all charge out. All these really nice, sweet people charge out with their ukuleles, and they start shaking our car. And we just had to hightail out of there. But they're before that, they're relatively nice. Listen, this is a very, it really cuts to, I think, the core of where we are politically. I think there's an inflection point in our country. And the inflection point is, do we want to move in the direction of Europe? Or do you want to, what I mean by that is, a welfare state where if it feels good, you do it. You give people whatever you can because, if it feels good, it's got to be right. And that's kind of the European model where they defy economic gravity, essentially. And now we're seeing that they can't defy gravity, and they're crashing down. Or do you want to continue with this American ethos of independence and working hard and providing for your family yourself? And I think that it's this divide that we see which really animates people. And I think the left-right divide, obviously, is the point where we see this inflection point take place. The middle, the majority of America, I think, realize we're moving. We don't want to go in the European direction, but I think the ones who do are very vocal about it.
I think also, public opinion aside, the takeaway is what does and doesn't work. I mean, if you look at Wisconsin, the policies that he put forth, they're working. They're reducing the deficit. They're decreasing the unemployment numbers, although there's some question about that in 2012. I think that's due to some of the uncertainty with respect to what's going on right now and businesses not knowing what's going to happen in the future. But I think if we look on a local level, we see what works. And if we were to apply that to a national level, those same pro-growth policies, I think you would see the same effect. So that was one of the more simple takeaway things that I got immediately.
Isn't it scary that might not work? That meaning that he showed we now have the results in, and that apparently things have gone well,
right.
And yet you're still facing somebody who may get tossed out of office.
Right, like public opinion is not reactive to policies working. It's just reactive to we don't want our stuff taken away.
Well, and proof of that is that this battle over recalling Scott Walker happened like 6 months into his term. I mean, he didn't have verifiable sort of policies in place for the people to say, this isn't working, you're not doing your job, throw the bums out. This was almost a gut reaction to what he had been saying the entire time on the campaign trail he was going to do. And he makes the point in Ami's piece that he didn't realize he was going to have to lay out the case yet again once he got elected.
And Ami, with Chris Christie, he took on public sector unions and is still pretty much applauded for it. And it looks like he's popular in New Jersey, which makes me think, is the key issue here that the change in the collective bargaining rights, is that the thing that really lit the fire? Do you think these public sector unions in Wisconsin, based on your conversation with people, maybe could have lived with the short-term cuts or changes and said, well, we'll get ours the next time around, we'll make sure that we organize for that? Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Was that the tipping
point? You're
absolutely
exactly right. Listen, nobody the major change they proposed was, putting aside collective bargaining for a second, it was that you had to pay 12.5% of your health care. Which is not a lot of money when you think about it, if you really break it down, and you had to pay a small portion of your pension. What I heard from the union leaders was that they didn't like it, they pushed back hard, but they could have lived with it.
Temporary setback for them.
Temporary setback. But really, you hit the nail on the head. Collective bargaining, specifically the notion of freedom of choice, that you can opt out of paying dues to a union, which they viewed as really an existential threat. And they're right. Listen, to be honest, they're right. It really is an existential threat to public unions in Wisconsin because, listen, you may not, who knows what % of the union members will opt out of it. And if they do, they're in trouble. And they're not just they're in trouble, the Democratic Party is in trouble because that's their bread and butter. Big union is a significant contributor to the Democratic Party.
I think it's also worth pointing out that these battles are happening and did happen in other states. Just to remind viewers what happened around the same time that this started boiling over in Wisconsin. In Ohio, Governor Kasich attempted to take teachers unions to task and propose new collective bargaining laws that were rejected 61 to 39% by Ohio voters. And of course, in Indiana, we all remember what happened when Democratic legislators walked out, left the state because they couldn't prevent Mitch Daniels, Governor Daniels' right to work bill from passing. And they stayed out of state and held several bills hostage and finally returned months later. And I think in both of those cases, what's interesting to point out is that Mitch Daniels and Governor Kasich sort of capitulated, ended up saying, okay, it's not worth the fight. In fact, Mitch Daniels said, we're not quite in the same position or advocating quite the same things they are up in Madison. They sort of said, okay, to the people, we're not up for this fight. Walker seems to be, and I think, Buck, you're right, throwing Christie in there, one of the only governors who's really been, you know, standing tall on this issue, willing to fall on the sword over this issue. And he highlights that in your piece, saying, I want to leave a legacy for my family, for my kids, for my grandkids, so they're proud of something their father did. I think that's rare.
But just